the big boys play.
All right. Jeremy Scahill's in the building. Jeremy Scahill of Dropsite is in the building. Esteemed guest. Welcome back, Jeremy. Unfortunately, every single time we have you on, it always feels like the world is collapsing right in front of our eyes. But it's still an honor to have you on nonetheless. Can you hear me?
Thank you for having me back.
Of course. So you guys, you just got done with your reporting. I believe you're in contact with some officials on the Iranian side, and Dropsite just revealed a couple hours ago, or your latest reporting shows, a very different perspective than what we're seeing in mainstream media. But I know you're paying close attention to what's going on in the news. Let's get started with, the I guess now almost 50-year project of Israel finally coming to a close. Do you feel like there is any? Do you feel like there's any argument that you've heard so far that made you go, maybe this is a real reason for why we're going to war with Iran?
No, and I think it has to be stated at the beginning, just from an American perspective, that the Democrats, we've seen this coming for weeks and weeks, that Trump was going to move forward on this. And at Dropsite, we've been reporting on things that we've heard even from people within the inner circle. And one of the things we reported recently is that Trump has been kind of stomping around, even in internal briefings, making statements like, I'm going to go down as the president that forever changed the Iranian regime, and obsessively talking about the '79 revolution and the seizure of the embassy. And they've been, this whole thing started on its surface in mid-January, after the protests in Iran that then converted into very bloody battles and attacks in the streets of Tehran and other cities around Iran. And there's competing narratives about what happened there. But Trump seized on that moment in Iran and said, help is on the way. And of course, the utterly discredited son of the deposed Shah also was calling on Iranians to rise up and seize institutions. And then nothing happened in the immediate aftermath of that. And then Trump basically almost entirely stopped talking about Iran is brutal toward its own citizens and they're massacring their own citizens. He was obsessively claiming that he had stopped all of these public hangings. But they basically dispensed with that, and then they resumed this talk about nuclear weapons. And every U.S. national intelligence estimate going back years had concluded that toward the end of 2003, Iran had given up its nuclear weapons ambitions. And then in June, Trump conducted all of these strikes over 12 days on the three main nuclear sites in Iran. And then they said that they had completely and totally obliterated Iran's nuclear program. In fact, they created a special web page on the White House website to preemptively declare as fake news anyone that would dare to say, otherwise. And then last weekend, we had Steve Witkoff, Trump's special envoy. He and Jared Kushner, the president's son-in-law, are the point guys on all of this. Witkoff makes like a Dick Cheney style statement and says, Iran is a week away from having industrial grade bomb making material. And they provided no evidence for that whatsoever. But it also sort of was like, well, wait a minute, you either totally obliterated the program or it's gotten so advanced that they're a week away from it. So they start obsessing about this nuclear thing. They're supposedly in negotiations again. Just what happened last year in June happened now, which is that they claimed they were going to have another round of technical talks in Vienna, Austria on Monday. The Omani foreign minister last night was with Vice President J.D. Vance and said that the prospects for a deal are very serious. And then, people wake up this morning to news that the United States and Israel have launched massive bombing at sites and cities across Iran. The death toll in this strike that hit the girls' school in Iran has now officially surpassed 85. I'm hearing from sources in Iran that there's been a strike on some kind of a gym facility in another area of Iran where children have also been killed. The Iranians, unlike last time that Israel and the U.S. bombed, didn't wait to sort of absorb it and then come up with their own calibrated response. As we've talked about before, the Iranians have choreographed their retaliatory strikes through back channels with the U.S. in previous times.
Yeah.
We've been reporting for weeks they're not going to do that again.
Yeah.
In fact, we've had sources close to the power structure in Iran that have said that they understand that they're aiming to kill at least 500 American personnel in retaliatory strikes. So delegation to launch strikes was dropped down to a much lower command level in Iran, and that's why you saw an unprecedented simultaneous retaliatory response from Iran across all of these Gulf Arab countries. They also hit Jordan. A colleague of mine in Israel, who's in a bomb shelter right now, just sent me a message saying that the pattern of these strikes is unlike anything we've seen in previous attacks, and that the public instructions are to stay inside of those shelters much longer and a much longer duration than ever before, during these retaliatory strikes from Iran.
Yeah.
Iranian naval vessels from the IRGC have been turning ships away at the Strait of Hormuz. It's unclear if it's officially closed right now, but it appears that could well happen. But to put a fine point on it, let's remember that the Democrats have seen this coming, and Hakeem Jeffries and Democratic leaders in the Senate as well refused to bring to a vote this war powers resolution. Now, I don't have any illusions about the position of the Democrats. In fact, we reported at DropSite that Chuck Schumer and others are cynically hoping that Trump does exactly what he's doing right now for two reasons. One, they actually support it. That's the most important thing to understand. It's a bipartisan consensus.
Absolutely.
They support it. They may not want to say it out loud. But then the other component is that they cynically believe that if it goes foul and wrong, remember, 70% of Americans don't want this war, that it's going to be on Trump and it's going to help their electoral chances. That's what you can distill this down into. They quietly want Orange Hitler to wage a war that they also want, and then they hope it kind of goes bad when he does it, even though they really want it to succeed, but they kind of hope it goes bad in the eyes of the American people so that it helps them. It's a win-win, and it captures in a nutshell the state of the institutional Democratic Party's posture when it comes to foreign policy.
Yeah, absolutely. I have the Ryan Grimm tweet here. It says Jeffries, who held off a war powers resolution long enough for Trump to go start the war before it came to a vote, does not condemn Trump's attack in his initial response. The party leadership, as we reported last week, is eager to see Trump launch this war. I'm sure you've seen the House Minority Leader's statement on this supposedly unprecedented surprise attack that America and Israel conducted on Iran, that they were signaling that they were going to do as they launched an armada. 50%, more than 50% of our entire naval assets were moved into the region over the last month or so. And Donald Trump kept saying, just like he did in the build up to the 12-day war, that there was going to be a negotiations process. But it was very clear. It was so clear that I actually interviewed Ben Rhodes, former Obama administration national security advisor Ben Rhodes, about how these negotiations were simply a sham. Israel had kept adding on additional qualifiers to the negotiations, many red lines that they were simply designing so that the Iranians would inevitably say no. What happened yesterday, however, was really interesting. The Omani official that went on television, I think, knew that this was probably going to happen. And that's precisely the reason why they were saying, no, Iran is actually totally on board with the negotiations and even leaning into maximalist demands that the American government was making on denuclearization. Demands that were even more aggressive than the JCPOA, as far as taking out enriched uranium from the country and whatnot. And I think they did that. This is speculation, of course, but I think they did that just to show the American population that the Iranian side was absolutely playing ball, no matter how ridiculous these negotiations were.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, also just to back up a bit, a couple of weeks ago, we started reporting based on sources that are informal advisors to the Trump administration and are very well connected with Arab governments, that the U.S. was almost certainly going to move forward with an attack, and that they needed to. The concern was not so much the offensive weaponry that the U.S. needed to get in place. They wanted a delay to bring in refueling aircraft. to bring in missile systems, THAAD, and others that would be capable of defending Israel or the American military bases in the region. And I think there's a real question of whether there was ever even a scintilla of intent to negotiate in good faith. It could be that the entire thing, even if Iran had capitulated in a shocking way, that they still would have gone forward short of the Iranians declaring that they're no longer going to be in Iran anymore, and that Trump is welcome to take over, or Pahlavi can come and walk right in, and we'll hand him the keys to the shop. But you had all of this stuff going on, and the Iranians, we started talking to senior Iranian officials, and what they said is, we're putting on the table things that go far beyond the scope of the JCPOA 2015 agreement. In fact, one official said to me, it would shock John Kerry. And John Kerry, of course, was the Secretary of State and was the lead negotiator of the 2015 deal. And so the enrichment levels, the oversight mechanisms they were willing to talk about, the idea that they would then have non-nuclear negotiations down the line, that they were going to buy American civilian aircraft, that they were going to open Iran's doors again to investment opportunities for American oil and gas companies and potentially other American corporations. Yeah. They put all of this on the table, and I think that from their perspective, they weren't Pollyannish about what they were facing. They know that Trump is kind of, a crooked godfather as head of state. Running around, there's consigliere Jared Kushner and Steve Witkoff, the real estate moguls, running around doing all of the bidding for Trump. But they felt like, we're going to show the world that we are exercising maximum flexibility on this question. And for some moments, it did seem, and by the way, I was told that there were actual direct talks between the US and the Iranians, not just in this last round, but going back to February 6th in Oman. And the Iranians were saying that they had a sense that the Americans were even taken aback by some of what they were willing to put on the table. So, I talked to Rob Malley, who was on that negotiating team in 2015, an American official, former envoy to Iran under President Biden. And he said Trump could just call it a day and declare victory on this. He's just like knocking it out of the park compared to Obama in terms of what he's able to get out of the Iranians right now. If the issue is nuclear, they've got a victory here. But the thing is, the issue wasn't nuclear. The issue hasn't ever been nuclear. The issue is regime change. The issue is fighting Israel's wars for it. And this all comes days after Mike Huckabee. I know you talked about this on the stream, but days after Mike Huckabee says to Tucker Carlson that, it's a perfectly acceptable goal for Israel to try to move not just from the sea, to the river, but from the sea to the Tigris and Euphrates.
Yeah. Yeah,
What we're seeing here is a combination of factors. This is war for Israel. Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. You're also a little bit delayed on your end. Your internet is cutting in and out a little bit. So I apologize for cutting you off. What I was gonna say is like there's competing interests here. There's converging interests and then there's diverging interests. On the American side, and I want to hear your perspective on my assessment. On the American side, obviously, we have a grand design for this resource-rich region. We want to dominate it. We want to have complete control over OPEC Plus to the best of our ability, or at least we want to have like the majority control, right? We have pliant, servile Gulf states, and also completely dominated, former states that are now failed states that are puppet states to the United States of America. As far as like oil producers. And we want to be able to we want to have controlling interest in OPEC Plus so that we can use that as a leverage point against our foreign adversaries, specifically China, right? And that's America's interest in the region. And Israel has different converging interests with the United States of America, and Israel plays a formative role in this project as a unsinkable aircraft carrier, as a missile sponge at times if need be, as a place where we can like develop our weapons, as a testing ground for some of the latest and greatest technology in terms of conducting warfare and surveillance and population control. But then on top of that, I think Israel's specific interest, beyond being a servant to American empire as a settler colonial apparatus, is this insane zealotry that they have in terms of following this ultra-Zionist agenda, this idea that they want to complete a greater Israel project. destroy all of the indigenous populations and either turn them into slaves or basically ethnically cleanse them and dominate this entire area from Lebanon to Syria as they've started taking on even more territory and annexing even more territory in these places, and maybe even parts of Saudi Arabia and Egypt. And who knows where they go from there, right? And definitely even start waging war with Turkey as well once Iran is knocked out of the equation, as even Naftali Bennett has clearly signaled, right? That's the convergence, but the divergence, I think, is when Israel's ambitions get in the way of a more reasonable path forward. And I think we saw that as a divergence in the Obama administration. The last time we had any sort of sovereignty in our own design in the Middle East was the JCPOA. Now, obviously, I have my own personal opinions on, developing nuclear sovereignty for nations in the periphery. I believe everyone has to have a nuclear program if they want to exist outside of the American nuclear umbrella as a sovereign state. Having said that, the JCPOA was something that the Obama administration put together to actually negotiate a peaceful path forward with Iran, to potentially normalize relations with Iran, to have a lot of controls over their nuclear program and their enrichment capabilities. And Israel hated that. And then Donald Trump came into office and ripped the JCPOA apart. And Iran still continued following along with the JCPOA for a little bit, but then Donald Trump added additional sanctions. This was Trump 1. And then Joe Biden came into power, and Joe Biden was also an ultra-Zionist, and Joe Biden also followed with the same exact agenda. I feel like post-Trump 1, Israel got into the driver's seat and was no longer simply a consultant or no longer simply, the tip of the spear in some ways on America's MENA policy, but basically took it over entirely. Do you agree with this assessment? I know it's very long. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I mean, a couple strings to pull on from what you just said. I think there is a sort of massive shift in aspects of Trump 1 to Trump 2. Remember that Trump openly viewed John Bolton, one of the most obnoxious neocons on the scene. He openly was talking about what a fanatical lunatic John Bolton was. And one of Bolton's kind of crowning achievements in the first Trump administration, when he was the national security advisor, was the assassination of General Qasem Soleimani at Baghdad airport in January of 2020, the head of the elite IRGC force of Iran. And when you read some of the reporting about it, and even sort of how Trump spoke about it at the time, it took a while for Trump to come around to that, and then ultimately he did it, and then he felt good about it, and it kind of showed him his awesome power. And it's like Trump liked those kind of clean things. Oh, I killed Baghdadi, I killed Qasem Soleimani. But in general, while Trump was a militaristic president, no doubt about it, in his first term, there was you got a sense that he was listening or sort of leaning more toward the direction of kind of the anti-interventionist, isolationist wing of the MAGA movement. And he kept the Israel firster Netanyahu neocon wing kind of a little bit at bay. He comes in this time, and again, the context is Joe Biden, 50-year dedicated Zionist who facilitated the Gaza genocide with total enthusiasm, throughout his 4 years in power, and then Kamala Harris, who comes out and when she becomes the nominee and says, "There's nothing I would do differently than him," and that's a huge part of why they lost, of course, but they don't want to release their autopsy, sets the stage then for Trump 2. And I think one of the most telling moments, and it speaks to the questions you're raising, in this entire period of Trump's second presidency, is when he goes to the Israeli Knesset back in October, when he's on his way to declare he's secured the Gaza ceasefire at Sharm el-Sheikh, Egypt. And he arrives in the Knesset, and it was sort of like a reverse Nuremberg trial, where the war criminals themselves are celebrating themselves and standing up and cheering one another. And he goes on and on about the kind of influence of Miriam Adelson, the late Sheldon Adelson's wife, and the single greatest bankroller of Trump's campaign. And he talks about her being the most influential, Israeli in the world. And I think that part of what's happened here is that led up to this is twofold. Trump now is completely in the service of the most extreme Zionist agenda in history. He's in total servitude to that agenda for a variety of reasons. He's not as sophisticated of a Zionist as Joe Biden was when his brain was intact, but Trump is all in, and he's willing to do anything for them at this point. And then the other component of it is that these guys are all high on their own supply. You've got drinking buddy Pete Hegseth as the so-called Secretary of War. You've got little Marco, who thinks he's Dulles risen from the dead, trying to overthrow Cuba and the Venezuela thing. They kidnap Maduro, and Trump starts to sort of want it injected into his veins. And I was told that Trump and his people were saying, can we do another Venezuela in Iran? And he's hearing from intelligence and military people, it doesn't work that way in Iran. And he doesn't like some of what he's hearing from the military people. And he starts to understand that, Iran didn't go all in the last times that they've struck against us, that their ballistic missiles are actually pretty ferocious in some ways, that there are weak links in the Iron Dome system in Israel, that it can be overwhelmed, that U.S. bases can be hit, that you may, Mr. President, face a mass casualty incident involving American personnel. So then they're talking about, what about a Libya option where we use air power? But the problem is, what ground forces do you have inside of Iran? And the other thing is, Iran, for as much as people talk about the supreme leader, Iran has been building horizontal institutions since 1979. This isn't a commentary about any internal political issue. These are for Iranians to debate. I'm looking at this from a perspective of military intelligence, strategic, what is possible and what isn't. Iran is not Libya. Iran is also not Venezuela in the sense that you're just going to lop off the supreme leader and then say we're making a deal with the rest of you. So they now are in this war that is not in any way in the interests of the American people whatsoever. It's not in the interests of anyone in that region except Israel. And so what do we have at the end of the day? The only conclusion we can draw is that Trump is fully purchased and bought into at the same time Israel's war of annihilations in the region. I was in touch with a senior Iranian official this morning and asked him about the response from all of these Arab countries where they're condemning quote unquote Iranian aggression, but then they're silent about the fact that it's the United States and Israel that launched this war. And he made a point, he condemned it. He said, of course, this is this is unfortunately what we've come to expect, etc. But he said, did they not understand eventually their number is going to come up? Like they may feel like they're in a good position right now. They had their nice little visit with Trump, but their cards are going to get pulled one day or another in this whole project. Right now they're useful pawns in this game.
Yeah. There's also this national security report from Reuters, which, maybe not always the most trustworthy, but at least on the American side, it's important that they're leaking this kind of thing. But Aaron Banco reports as a Reuters exclusive, the CIA assessed before the strikes that even if Iran's supreme leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei was killed in the operation, he would likely be replaced by hardline figures from the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. And I've said this over and over again, that the Ayatollah himself is 87 years old. He is a zealot, but and therefore I think like martyrdom would probably be something that he looks forward to. But outside of that, there's also obviously like you said, a horizontal leadership structure, and within the Iranian forces, within the Politburo, within the political side of Iranian civil society, and within the IRGC, the Ayatollah is probably one of the more restrained elements, whether it be offering personal setbacks to the Iran nuclear program, or even the restrained nature in which Iran has refused to retaliate beyond some kind of retaliatory theater, as we talked about with Qatar. So if you take out Ayatollah, or even some of the top-line generals in the IRGC, which have become even hardliners from the last cleansing that took place in the 12-Day War, you're going to have a group of individuals that are even less responsive to American negotiations. That's my speculation. And it turns out the CIA is saying similar things as well.
But Yeah, and I think that I mean, there's a couple things I want to comment on that, but just to start with what you just said, I think that even is confirmable from the Iranian perspective, because what we've been told by sources is that they have a multi-layered succession system that they put into place at the
Yeah.
time of the 12-day war. And it is true that a significant number of senior military figures who fell into, a more moderate camp when it came to how should we be responding to attacks by militarily by the United States and Israel, they're gone. And there were directives issued, as I said at the beginning, further down the command chain. And that's why you saw this almost immediate retaliatory response by Iran across the spectrum, and actually increasingly seems like they're going to start hitting targets in these countries in a real way. There's been, like, a hotel here, military facility here. The airport in Kuwait was also apparently bombed as well. But I think we're gonna see a lot more on that front. But on this issue of, like, is someone from the IRGC going to take power? That's not exactly what we've been hearing from Iranian sources. That's not what has been reported from the Iranian side. It's newsworthy that that is the assessment that the CIA is making. But again, I think it goes back to Iran being a nation of institutions. Yes, it has
Yeah.
a supreme leader, and that seems like a very foreign concept to certainly to Westerners. But that doesn't mean that it's not a country of institutions. Another thing about Ali Khamenei specifically, remember that, yes, he is a religious and a highly revered religious figure in the world of Shia Islam. There's no question about that. But he also, on a tactical level, was deeply involved with the Iran-Iraq war.
Yeah.
And he is not just a guy sitting in a room, praying for the world. This is someone who
Absolutely.
also has been a combatant in this war since the 1979 Islamic Revolution, understands the stakes very well, and understands military strategy. This is not just like your neighborhood priest who's giving, like, this is someone who really, really understands on a tactical and political level the enemy that his country is facing. That is just a factual thing. This is a highly advanced scientific society
Yeah.
that is a society of
Yeah.
institutions. I keep emphasizing that because it is not some, sort of banana republic somewhere where you just pluck out the
Yeah.
dictator and everything comes crumbling down. The other part of it is, who are the ground forces that are going to come in to implement this thing? Pahlavi, what, he's going to raise an army? The MEK, this fanatical cult that has this oversized influence among politicians in the United States. You're going to have what, Kurdish forces, come in. It's some military planners have said it's like they're not actually thinking it through on a political level. The U.S. military advisors, they're telling Trump all of this stuff.
Yeah.
They're painting pictures for him. And the Trump people kept coming back and looking for something clean. So what do we get in Trump's speech? We get Trump going out there, and it was like this weird hodgepodge potpourri of things I'm going to throw at you. Wow, the 79 revolution. Oh, they took our embassies hostage. Then he throws in, they were involved with the USS Cole bombing in Yemen in 2000, which was done by Al Qaeda, sort of sworn enemies of Iran. He's just throwing everything at the wall. And then he's saying, after we are finished raining bombs down on you, everyone should stay inside for now because bombs are going to rain down. But then you're going to seize the reins of power, which you've always wanted, and we're going to hand it over to you. It's as though it presumes that there is some strange, tiny cult that somehow is in charge of a nation of 90 million people, and that it's just a matter of killing the leaders of that.
Yeah.
And then everybody comes out and says, oh my God, we want the Shah back in power. And this is like fanciful thinking that, from an American perspective too, if you want to be like just looking at what are America's interests, could well result in a large number of American deaths. Not to mention, they're blowing up girls' schools within hours of this thing starting. They blow up, and I'm sure the death toll is going to rise. They hit a girls' school. They're hitting sports facilities. That bombing, by the way, of that girls' school is as horrifying as some of the worst single bombing episodes that we've seen in Gaza. And they did it within like hours
Yeah.
of launching this thing on day one. We always talk about what are American interests, but I think it needs to be said, Hasan, that what about the Iranians who are dying on the other side of these missiles? And again, the whole thing is a cooked up narrative.
Yeah.
There is no imminent threat. There is nothing to preempt. The only thing that was preempted was a diplomatic solution where the other side was making concessions that were on an unprecedented scale. The Iranian people are being punished for Trump's nonsensical war that was facilitated by the Democrats doing nothing yet again, not raising any voices, quietly cheering this on, cynically hoping that it benefits them electorally. That's the bankrupt nature of our politics that leads to a war that is setting literally the Middle East on fire right now.
Yeah, no, they have no succession plan, and that much is very clear from some of the targets that they've actually prioritized as well in the first round of the bombing, where apparently they tried to strike the president's residence as well, and the president is like elected civil society leadership that is a reformist, right? Like this is, I know that I'm
so
sure
is
that
the foreign minister by that matter. So is the foreign minister.
Exactly. The
Arachi
foreign
also
minister and
comes
the
out of that
president
camp.
they're not like they're nowhere near even from the eyes of the Iranian population. They're not seen as like, I'm sure that they're very upset because they feel as though the Ayatollah hand selects everyone regardless. But like these are some of the more reformist and some of the more moderate forces in Iranian society. They've actually, from what I understand, targeted the in the Pasteur district, the residential building in which Akhtar Ali, the leader of Iran's Green Movement, was housed under house arrest since 2011. So they're actually going after oppositional figures as well, and it leads me to believe that their goal here is to create a Libya-style scenario without any sort of ground elements they have, or maybe lean heavily into whatever kind of Mossad ground elements they do have inside of the country, and hope that Kurdish forces can cause enough chaos and destabilization elsewhere, and then internally in Tehran and in the heart of the government, the heart of the Iranian government, they can create enough mass instability with the hopes that they just have a failed state. It seems like that's their most likely scenario out of this. They have no succession plan. Well, wouldn't be appropriate even if they had a succession plan, by the way. I'm not saying that at all, but it's just very obvious that they have no goals here other than the fact that Israel is terrified of the Iranian ballistic missiles program because it showed its capabilities of being able to cut through the THAAD interceptors and the Arrow systems and the Tamir interceptors as well, and actually strike at the heart of Israel in Tel Aviv and strike at military targets in and around Israel. And they want to be able to defang the administration with the hopes that they can just without depleting their munitions like they almost did last time. They want to be able to cause enough instability and enough chaos that there's never a threat from the Iranian ballistic missile systems ever again.
Yeah, and I think remember what Israel did when Assad fell in Syria. Which Trump recently took credit and said that he basically put Ahmed al-Sharaa, in power. That's for a different show though. But the Israelis turned around and they bombed the entire conventional military capacity of Syria, including all of its defensive weaponry that basic nation states have. And the reason that Israel did that was to ensure that no Arab government was going to be able to take power or establish power in Syria that would be capable of defending itself against Israel. And Israel, of course, is moving toward annexing even further territory inside of Syria. And I think there's a degree to which, I don't know to what extent Trump is willing to go the distance for what he believes is going to be a regime change war. Remember, it was the U.S. and Israelis that sort of wanted the 12-day war to end, that reached out and said, okay, enough is enough. And the Iranians view this as it's the launch of a potentially existential war. And so I think we're going to see them pull no punches in their reply. But how long does Trump want to take this on? What happens if the Iranians manage to strike a U.S. base and they kill a large number of U.S. personnel? What's going to happen in that scenario? So we have those questions, but let's play this out a bit and say, okay, they're going to continue bombing and they're hitting ballistic missile sites throughout the country. They're rebombing some of the facilities that they did last time, which, again, there's no imminent threat of Iran making a nuclear bomb. We should just be very clear about that. But let's say that the point is to use that as a justification for doing the rest of this. And they don't really even pretend to have an ultimate justification. It's kind of like a junior varsity version of the Cheney propaganda that took place prior to 2003. They're taking some shades of Cheney, but it's not even like in the same universe of sophistication as that campaign. And it's much more haphazardly thrown together. And sidebar, Hasan, the New York Times, for all of their kind of pearl clutching about Donald Trump and his dangers, what are they doing right now? They're conveyor belts again for the same lies.
Yeah.
They're doing stories saying like, oh, Al Qaeda and Iran are in cahoots again, and they're going to activate their networks in Europe. They're doing the same thing again. They're doing the exact same thing, even though like they view him as like Orange Hitler, who's going to put David Sanger in a concentration camp. And it's like, so now we're in this situation where I think part of it is that they're just going to go after Iran's missile capacity, because Israel recognizes this may take a long time, or Israel may want to continue to be attacking Iran. But the real question is here, at what point is the U.S. going to say, okay, it's enough? It's a real question. It's a real question how long this is sustainable, especially if targets start getting hit, which I think they probably will, in the region, meaning Iran is going to start hitting and getting quote unquote successful strikes on U.S. military assets.
And they've set it up this time in a much more, in a much less restrained manner as well, going after American bases and radar systems and early advanced warning systems in and around the Gulf, where American military bases are. And they targeted them, and they haven't actually, they've been pummeling Israel a lot harder this time around as well. They've learned a lot of lessons from the 12-day war. And I think this was generally what the military advisors were leaking to the press in the buildup with this armada coming into the region, where they kept saying, like, we don't know if we have enough munitions, not for offensive capabilities, mind you, but for defensive capabilities. And I think that they also knew that this was going to happen. That's still economic activity for the American military industrial complex, for developers, for contractors and whatnot to go back to those bases and build again, right? But they knew that those bases would get blown up. They totally let go of those bases, and that's precisely the reason why they brought in a fleet of AWAC, air surveillance systems instead, all to basically defend Israel in the upcoming retaliatory strikes. Now, I don't know how successful this defense will look like. I don't know how successful the THAAD systems will look like, especially considering that the THAAD systems actually failed to intercept quite a bit. We haven't seen the full scope of the Iranian munitions and how much they can, like, how much more success they can have in terms of penetrating the Israeli defenses. But I think this is not going to be as successful an operation for America. And I think if this continues, the longer this goes on, the worse things will get, especially if they end up striking American assets with American active duty service members in it.
Yes. And I think probably Israel has fed the United States an idea, because I think there's still a lot of people enamored of the Israeli intelligence in Iran. And, without question, Israel has been able to successfully, clandestinely and covertly, and at times overtly, strike inside of Iran. There's no question about that. But I think that the power of their intelligence services, or the prowess of it, is overrated. And I think that they do a very good job of snowballing the Americans into believing that their intelligence is like platinum level. Yeah. And I bet that my guess would be that there is a lot of, or a significant amount of, wishful thinking that's been stovepiped, through the system into concrete intelligence about what might happen if you just manage to kill Khamenei and the commanders of the IRGC. That actually there's great consternation within the conventional military in Iran, that we think we could start to see defections take place. And Pahlavi, nobody really likes him, but he does have X, Y, and Z, and the Israelis are ready to do this, and they can smuggle weapons in this way. I can imagine that they have some little lab that they're cooking this stuff up in, and they're hoping that, like, things come together if they just continue to bomb and bomb and bomb and bomb. I think there's a real chance that that's part of the plan, is wishful thinking. But again, it's how heavily is the United States going to bomb? What are they going to bomb? How are the Iranians going to respond? What is the response going to be in the region? If this goes on and on and on, and Iran really does pull out all stops and puts its military force on display, we're going to know whether it was hot air or whether the Iranians were telling the truth, that they've really calibrated their responses. I don't think we've seen the most ferocious Iranian response. I think this is just starting.
Yeah, no, I agree, and we'll see. Especially in nighttime, it is nighttime now in the region, so we'll see what kind of retaliatory strikes they have. They've definitely upped the intensity of their bombing campaigns in retaliation to Israel's strike, and who knows? I mean, the one thing I will say is that the only thing that both America and Israel respond to and choose to back away from is a military deterrence. That's the reason for why there is an indigenous, ballistic missile defense industry in Iran that has been fairly successful. And it seems that like restraint over and over again, and assuming that like the Western nations will deal with Iran in as equal partners in any capacity has been an abject failure, and it looks like they're recognizing that now. Because once you get backed into a corner over and over again, you're basically teaching your adversaries that the only way to get out of it is to fight out of it, to fight their way out of it.
Yeah.
All right. Well,
and
yeah, I was gonna
and again, like
go ahead. Sorry. It's there's a little bit of drop.
Yeah, I apologize if it's my internet.
Yeah, no, it's all good. Go ahead.
Yeah, just one final thought on this. I mean, all governments are going to say, oh, you're not, we're ready to take you on. We're going to fight. You're not going to be able to overthrow us. Like, I don't think any of us that have followed warfare or American regime change operations, or know anything about this history, are naive to that. But when we talk about the difference between Iran and the other nations that the United States or Israel have attacked in this manner, we're talking about a much more formidable adversary. We're talking about a much larger geographic area. We're talking about a much more modern and sophisticated society with a very sophisticated military and weapons production system. And we're talking about decades of building horizontal institutions. So it's not that the United States doesn't have the bombs to just continue on and on and on. It's not that there isn't sort of a really nefarious will here that's at play, or that Israel is finally getting its way. That's all true. At the end of the day, it's going to boil down to some unpredictable components that neither you nor I really can imagine at this point. And I think that it can come down to also what happens when there is a large scale casualty incident involving Americans. How is Trump going to respond? Is he going to lose his mind and start talking about using a nuclear weapon? How is he going to respond to that? What happens if you do this for a couple of weeks, and yes, you've killed a bunch of people, but there's no sign of an uprising happening? There's no sign of rebellion. And instead, what you're seeing is large demonstrations of Iranians inside uniting against what the US is doing. What happens in that scenario? From the Iranian perspective, what does happen if the use of force by the United States is much more overwhelming than any analysts expected? That they are actually severely degrading the country's ability to launch ballistic missiles? What happens if there is a real wipeout of multiple layers of the succession system in Iran? These are questions that float around in the ether. And at the end of the day, the narrative from the US is that there's this Islamic Republic dictatorship that's holding a nation of 90 million people hostage. That's the dominant narrative. My sense is that Iran is a much more pluralistic society than that you have much sharper and nuanced degrees of how Iranians in general view the Islamic Revolution, the Islamic Republic government, what they want in their society. This isn't a case of two options where you either have, these secular, Western oriented Iranian diasporas who think that, who want to make sure that no one ever has to wear a hijab. And then on the other side, you have the mullahs. It's a ridiculous oversimplification that does a service to no one to think about. So that human dimension is something that almost never gets talked about. Iranians don't fall into two categories. You have people, even within the ruling state in Iran, there is great diversity of how people view what that government should be like, how they view its policies, including some of the favored policies to talk about in the West. There's great diversity of thought. And all I'm cautioning here is that let's say that the US and Israel are able to do unspeakable damage to the state in Iran. That doesn't mean that Iranians are going to like en masse say, oh my God, thank you, Donald Trump. Now here we have X kind of government. That oversimplification is a total disservice, including to Americans who are trying to assess what they actually believe about these policies.
Yeah. One last question before I let you go. Thank you so much for coming on, by the way. Jeremy Scahill of Dropside, everybody. And my question for you is, what do you have to say to these middle powers who at Davos, led by Mark Carney and many others, had condemnations for the United States of America and the death of the New World Order when Trump came out and basically treated white countries, European allies in the same way that he treats countries like Venezuela and the same way that he's treating a country like Iran. There was a lot of condemnation during the Greenland incident, and yet every single one of these European leaders and the Canadian leader with Mark Carney has come out to condemn not the United States of America and Israel for blowing up schools only a couple hours ago. And according to the Red Crescent, the death numbers are at 200 plus at this point in the first round of bombing, with 700 plus casualties overall. They are condemning Iran for retaliating. What do you have to say about this?
Well, look, I mean, all of these countries have just been like cucked by Trump. I mean, it's really impressive. And I heard even Keir Starmer today say that Iran needs to give up its missiles. What nation state exists without a capacity to defend itself? He didn't even say like nuclear weapons. He said they need to give up their weapons program. And it's like, okay, Iran, the solution to this is you're being attacked by the most powerful nation in the world, plus Israel, and the Prime Minister of Britain gets up and says that the solution is Iran should end its weapons program, as though that means that they don't believe that Iran should be a state. And so you have the Arab countries, with the exception of Oman, have all come out and they're condemning Iranian aggression. They're saying nothing about the US and Israeli aggression. You have the European countries who all are issuing these milquetoast statements about concerns about rising violence, and they're speaking as though there is no aggressor involved here. And then they pivot to the most passionate languages denouncing Iran, as though Iran started this. Iran has capitulated in terms of their terms to a set of demands that if they were on the table in previous deals that the Europeans have called for, the Europeans would feel that they had essentially tricked Iran. So what the logical European position on all of this would have been to say to Trump, do you understand what we have on the table here? We have been working for decades on this. No one has ever been able to achieve this before. Oh my God, thank you, Donald Trump. You got this. Sign this deal with Iran right now. But they're all afraid. They're all little poodles getting walked around the block constantly by Donald Trump, and they say nothing. And then they pathetically denounce the country that just had a girls' school bombed, where more than 85 people just got killed, a country that wasn't launching strikes at the United States. And the Europeans have the audacity to denounce Iranian aggression and call for it to lay down its entire weapons program, to not be a state anymore. I mean, we live in a totally upside down world. And I'll end with this. In my mind too, some of the biggest villains in this story, the Democratic Party. The Democrats, from the time that the genocide began in Gaza, and it was their man and their woman in the driver's seat on that thing. It was Biden and Harris, and they could have ended that war. They could have ended that genocide tens of thousands of Palestinians ago. They could have warded off this whole thing. They gave us Donald Trump. They should never be able to shake these two fundamental facts from the past 3 years. They facilitated the genocide. They ensured it would continue. Then they refused to listen to people who were saying, you're going to lose this election to Donald Trump if you don't stop this policy. They refused to listen to people that knew what they were talking about, and they gave us Donald Trump. None of these people have any right to say, oh, the Palestinians in Michigan did this. No, you did this. And now you're doing it again. You're doing it again because you cynically actually like it. You cynically actually like what Donald Trump is doing. And then you pretend, oh, we're against it. Oh, my God, Chuck Schumer saying the president needs to make his case. No, you need to make your case as to why you haven't done war powers resolutions, why you're not up in arms about this war of aggression that we're launching.
Why
we've seen this. You and I now are old enough. We've seen it.
Yeah.
Over and over.
Why you've held it off until the bombing campaigns began. Like there was an opportunity. There was a shorter period. I saw someone talking about it. There was a shorter period of time in which like they created a resolution to honor Charlie Kirk. I think it was 8 days. It's been 12 days since it's been much longer than that, but certainly 12 days since like the Iranian conversation greatly escalated when the Armada was there. 50-60% of our naval assets are in the region. 12 days. They could have pushed for this war powers resolution ahead of time. They didn't. They waited on purpose. Now, the thing is, that's not going to stop Trump anyway. But they're not even creating the legal hurdles, like the congressional hurdles that are necessary to basically carry out impeachment later down the line if they end up winning in the midterms and have the capacity to start articles of impeachment once again. That's what's so crazy, is that they're not putting up any fight whatsoever. And it's so obvious that is because they want this to happen. It is uniparty. Striking Iran has been a uniparty decision for many, many years. Now, I'm not saying that there aren't any Democrats at all that are against this. There certainly are some who have been outspoken on this, but they are far from the majority. And as long as those people also don't call out the party leadership for their lack of interest in moving in any direction to create some sort of like reasonable defense against it, it's all seen as, in my opinion, a total capitulation, total concession to the fascist imperialist endeavors of the Trump administration and Israel.
Yeah, I mean, I know you're gonna move on, but just in closing on that front, I agree with you that there are a handful of political elected officials in the Congress, and they're not all Democrats. I think of Thomas Massey, for example. And Ro Khanna, of course. I mean, I think that they've done a really sort of praisable campaign on the war powers issue. And that's one narrow component of this, because remember that presidents also violate this all the time. Yeah. And Bill Clinton did this during his presidency, waging wars and violating the concept of the War Powers Act. So we shouldn't also view that as like, oh, Congress is going to do this and then Trump's going to listen to them.
Oh yeah.
Presidents, both Democrats and Republicans, Trump is doing it in the extreme right now. They really are enamored of this idea of the unitary executive, that when it comes to quote unquote national security policy, that Congress's only function is to fund the priorities that the president implements. This was the life's work of Dick Cheney and Donald Rumsfeld, and the embodiment of it under Trump is a real story. Because Trump looks like a buffoon in a lot of ways, and he says the most outrageous stuff. But if you look at it really through the lens of like what Cheney and those guys were trying to do, what's clear is that Cheney and company made a mistake by caring too much about the law. This was it. They were a lawless administration. They cared too much. Trump's kind of showing them how it's done. And he's also showing them, in the same way that Israel is showing they can bomb whoever they want and no one's going to do anything about it, Trump is showing them the Democrats aren't going to actually do anything about it. They're not going. They can't do anything about it. So we shouldn't waste too much time on like, oh my God, the War Powers Act. Oh my God, they violated the War Powers Act. It's an important battle, but the bigger battle is, where's the spine from the so-called opposition to stand up to these things, even in their own making the case to the American people. Chuck Schumer says Trump needs to make the case to the American people. Why aren't the Democrats making the case to the American people in a very robust way? Why this is a horrible idea on multiple levels, including what it's going to do to 90 million people in Iran and what it's going to do to the region, not to mention actual American interests, like not having our people killed. They're not making the case at all. So it's not just about the war powers resolution or demanding that Trump make his case to the Congress. It's also, if we had a real opposition, they'd be making the moral, ethical, and strategic case like their very existence depended on it right now. 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago. And they won't do that ever. So yes, War Powers Act, we should use it, but that's not the end all be all.
Yeah, no, the reason why I brought that up is because the War Powers Act, by my assessment, is kind of like a restraining order, right? A restraining order doesn't create a physical protective barrier around you and your stalker. It just simply creates legal paperwork so that when there is any sort of additional enforcement of a restraining order, in violation of a restraining order, you have more tools in your disposal to prosecute it. And the War Powers Act here is not technically in a functioning government. It's supposed to be a mechanism of enforcement, but we know it's not. But at least it creates a paper trail, a legal paper trail, so that you can actually enforce articles of impeachment later down the line. It also advances the narrative.
You're 100. I 100% agree with you. I don't mean to imply that it's a nothing thing. I'm just saying that it shouldn't be the only thing we're talking about.
Oh, for sure.
But remember too, the era we live in now, it's not just that like you have to tune into C-SPAN to watch the debate. You know, in the media environment we live in now, with clipping, with people pulling things, what would happen if we had an actual war powers resolution debate is that you would have an actual debate about fundamental issues involving the American Constitution, about the war powers of the Congress, about the war making of the president, and then you would have the best among that lot in Congress making some of the cases that you would want to hear or I would want to hear.
Yeah.
And then what that does is you then see recognizable politicians making this case. The clips go around. That's how you then initiate also a public debate on it.
Yeah.
Because we don't just have to have C-SPAN. We'd be all of us would be sitting there clipping like mad. This was said, this was said, this was said, picking it apart, fact checking in real time. That would have, if we had done this 3 weeks ago, when it was so clear this is where we were headed, then it's like the Democrats would have been doing something at least. It's not just about the war powers. They would have facilitated a debate. We would have had an opportunity to talk about it where we would have seen the positions of elected officials. They didn't want to go on record. That's really the dark story here. None of them actually wanted to have to go on record about this.
Yeah, no, absolutely. They didn't want it. They didn't want their ambitions to be known. And it's crazy because, once again, theoretical democracy is collapsing, especially in Western liberal democracies. And we see that, especially when you look at the polls and you look at the attitude that the American population broadly has, where only 27% of Americans actually want to strike Iran, and more than 70% of Americans don't. In the Democratic Party, the overwhelming majority, if not damn near the entirety of the party's base of support, actually, one, has dropped its support of Israel, has higher sympathies, much higher sympathies for the Palestinian population as opposed to the Israeli population and the Israeli government. And especially in the case of striking Iran, there is no real constituency. And yet, amongst our elected representatives, if you were to look at their makeup overall, if you look at their attitude overall, it's not a real democracy in any way, shape, or form. They are not abiding by the democratic wishes of their own base, of the majority of Americans, and certainly not even their own base of support within the party as well, where 80% of the Democrats say no war with Iran, and yet 98% or something as high as 98% of Democratic electeds are either quiet about it or very restrained in their approach. It's completely unacceptable.
Yeah. Well, Hasan, thank you very much, man, for having me on. And again, you know, big thanks to your crew of people. Like from the first time I was on your feed, I've said this every time I've been on, but I really mean it. Like you know, you've also got some wackadoodles with you, but like in general, your community is a great group of people, man. Yeah. And I always love the dialogue and the feedback that I get from your broader community.
Yes. Thank you so much for coming on. Everybody support Dropsite and Jeremy's reporting. It's an honor to have you on as always. Thank you. All right. Have a good one.
Take care, everybody.
Bye. Okay. I am going to run to the bathroom as I play this video now because I have to pee really bad. But that was Jeremy Scahill, everybody.
Our objective is to defend the American people by eliminating imminent threats from the Iranian regime, a vicious group of very hard, terrible people. Its menacing activities directly endanger the United States, our troops, our bases overseas, and our allies throughout the world. For 47 years, the Iranian regime has chanted death to America and waged an unending campaign of bloodshed and mass murder, targeting the United States, our troops, and the innocent people in many, many countries.
All right, let's bring in CNN's Elena Treen. She's reporting from Palm Beach, Florida. Elena, the president said on Friday that he was not happy with where the talks were with Iran, and now we're seeing the consequences of that.
Absolutely, and I think you're right to point out that the context of all of this is incredibly important. We had been hearing of Victor in recent days, really in the lead up until this strike, these strikes this morning, the president saying that he wanted diplomacy. He was hoping a deal could be reached. And from all the conversations I had with people at the White House, that was sincere. But of course, at the same time, you saw the Trump administration and the president directly order the most massive military buildup in the region since essentially the 2003 war with Iraq. And so that leverage was there. And I think a lot of people were waiting to see whether the president would move on that. And of course, he did. I also found it very remarkable just to see the president in that video statement giving it and releasing it on social media, having that be the way that he delivered it. But look, there's a couple of things I took away, Victor, from those remarks from the president. One is that he said that this is going to be a massive and ongoing operations. And that comes as sources are telling our colleague Zach Cohen and I that the United States is planning for there to be several attacks or several days of attacks. This is going to be a long operation and could ultimately be, the largest military operation the president has ever overseen, including during his first term. But another moment that I found very striking as well is that he essentially...
I've long said that George W. Bush is the worst contemporary administration that America has ever seen, bar none, because of the global war on terror. After today's events, depending on where this goes, I think Donald Trump is objectively now the official title holder and is far more devastating. I will say that. I think that his reign of terror is going to be more consequential than George W. Bush. If this goes the way that they're signaling, and there is a destabilization of Iran in particular, it is truly, I mean, at the domestic front, Trump is worse. All this stuff is true, right? I mean, George W. Bush did the Patriot Act. He walked so Trump could run. All this stuff is theoretical. But if you look at the actual, like, incalculable death toll of the global war on terror, the destabilization that took, the destabilization came afterwards or during, until this moment, they were competing with one another. From this point onward, I think Trump takes the cake. This isn't to say that Donald Trump was good by any metric, by the way. I'm just trying to highlight how evil the Bush administration was.
And effectively called for regime change in Iran. The president said in those remarks, quote, "When we are finished, take over your government." That was a message.
He cares more about Iran's democracy than he cares about the U.S. democracy? No, brother. He does not care about either democracy. He does not care about democracy, period. And he's never cared about Iranian democracy. That's not a real thing. You don't bring about democracy by blowing up schools. You don't bring about democracy by blowing a country up. That's just a lie that they half-heartedly told the American population leading up to this. And I guess some people were silly enough to believe it. But that was never the case. That was never the truth.
Directly to the Iranian people. It will be yours to take. This will probably be your only chance for generations. That is a huge statement, particularly as really over the past year or so, ever since the president went into office for his second term, all of his top advisors were trying not to say that directly. And even though the president didn't say it directly, he came as close as he ever really has to acknowledging that one of the goals in this larger operation is to potentially see if the Iranian people can use this weakened state that the regime now finds itself in to kind of overthrow and push against the government there. So that was a remarkable thing as well. I also think it's worth pointing out, and you mentioned this, Victor, just how disappointed and frustrated the president seemed yesterday when talking about the negotiations that were going on just 2 days ago in Geneva between the president's top advisors, Steve Witkoff, and his son-in-law, Jared Kushner, with the Iranians and intermediaries in Switzerland, saying that they did not go far enough. And what we know that the United States wanted from Iran was to, one, be very clear that they had no goals and did not want to ever make a nuclear weapon, and also that they would commit to zero enrichment of uranium, things that the president argued they were not able to get to. And so that is what's led us to this moment. But of course, so many big questions, I think, that many Americans still have about what the future of this is going to look like.
It's really interesting that one of the questions that I keep receiving in the chat over and over again is like the coverage around whether or not Ayatollah Ali Khamenei is dead or not. The Israeli intelligence has often been correct in their assessment whenever they say, like, a high-profile target has actually been assassinated. There are very few instances where they actually get it wrong. They lie about everything else. But the Israeli intelligence is saying that Ayatollah Ali Khamenei is dead. Iran is saying that that is not the case. Now, judging by past performance, he could just as well have been killed. The issue here that a lot of people don't comprehend is that is not as meaningful as you think it is, okay? Even if that was the case, which there's no evidence for at this moment, that's nowhere near as meaningful as you think it is, or meaningful in the direction that you think it might help boost morale of like some on-the-ground movement of Iranians that are going to now seize control over the government, okay? As I talked about with Jeremy earlier, there is a line of succession. This is a competent government with a contingency plan built into it, with horizontal expansion and numerous other forms that can seize control over the government and the government functions and continue retaliating against both the United States and also Israel. And not only that, but also there is a regional significance for the Ayatollah as well, as you probably know by now if you've been in here for a long enough time, that there are Shias all around. There are Shias in Lebanon. There is a robust Shia population in Iraq, in places where there are American military bases, and their response to the assassination of their highest their highest religious figure will not be kind. Okay? But whether he is dead or alive still doesn't change the reality that this is still a functioning government. The notion that you would just like take out the Pope of Iran, right? The Pope of Shia Islam, and then all of a sudden everyone's going to go, oh my God, he's dead, so I guess it's over now, is silly, is stupid. Holy shit, look at this video. That Shahed is flying at you, bro. For the record, and I saw this with my own personal fucking two eyes when I was in Doha. Not to say that this is happening in Doha right now, but if you're wondering, if you're curious as to why the Iranian drones are being expended on like civilian infrastructure in hotels and whatnot, I suspect that the Iranian intelligence has seen that the American military has not fully left they've left the bases, but they've probably not fully left the countries. They're not all in Israel or whatever. I suspect that they're probably staying in those hotels because there's no other reason why they were just like, this is Iran attacking all the Middle East, not Israel. Know your enemy, buddy. Wait, what? Is Iran attacking everyone, not Israel? Know your enemy, bud. Do you think Iran is just attacking Bahrain and the Gulf states for no fucking reason? Are you stupid? I'm literally in the process of explaining to you why they're not only striking American radar and American military bases in the region, but they're also most likely striking at these civilian infrastructure because the American military assets have moved into the civilian infrastructure and they're basically waiting it out. Now, is that actually within the rules of war? I don't think so, but does it fucking matter? Obviously not, right? There are no more rules of war at this point. This is the design that Israel and America had for the rest of the world. Also, it's really funny to be like, know your enemy. If you're Middle Eastern, if you're a Gulf state, know your enemy. It's Iran. It's not fucking America and Israel. Okay, buddy. The reason why I said I saw this with my own two eyes because when I was in Doha, when I was staying at the hotel that I was staying at, I saw like officers in uniform also staying at the hotel. Scenes of damage to the Kuwait airport following his targeting by a drone. Do you think Iran will respond by launching at America? At America, thousands of miles away? Iran, as far as I know, does not have the ballistic missiles capability of targeting American soil. They will most likely target the American naval assets in the region if they haven't done so thus far. America, in many respects, gets to be as violent as it wants to be because it's actually totally sheltered from the consequences of its endeavors. This is the reason why we get to behave in the violent and unrestrained ways that we want to. I support all I support all the lies the war is based on, but not the war itself. Old liberal proverb. Now compare and contrast Zohran Kwame Mamdani's statement about going to war with Iran and what the consequences of that might look like versus Gavin Newsom. The corrupt and repressive Iranian regime must never have nuclear weapons. The leadership of Iran must go. But that does not justify the president of the United States engaging in an illegal, dangerous war that will risk the lives of our American service members and our friends without justification to the American people. President Trump is putting Americans at risk abroad because he is unpopular at home. This is the lackluster, shit-lib response to Donald Trump literally fucking waging war with Iran. It is mind-boggling. Also, the name of the Green Movement leader is Mir Hussein Musawi, not Ali Akhtar. Sorry, Ali Akhtar is the area that he's in. Also, Samira Zone is in here and has been yelling at me for the last week. Okay? And he's still talking about why is Iran targeting residential buildings? Brother, oh my fucking God. Your countrymen are being slaughtered. And you're still going, why is Iran targeting civilian buildings? You are out of your fucking mind, dude. 200 dead, 90 schoolgirls murdered by American weapons, by American targeting systems in Israeli hands, and you're going, oh, why is Iran retaliating? You are a psycho. You're a fucking psychopath. Jesus Christ. Please, what the fuck? This is what we were talking about. This is what I was saying for weeks and weeks on end. The notion that like Americans care about liberal democracy in Iran is so fucking stupid because America wants to blow up Iran. America wants to kill even more protesters than the Iranian government did. And you're over here thinking that this is going to be a liberal.
Politicians making this case. The clips go around. That's how you then initiate also a public debate on it.
Yeah.
Because we don't just have to have C-SPAN. We'd be all of us would be sitting there clipping like mad. This was said, this was said, this was said, picking it apart, fact-checking in real time. That would have, if we had done this 3 weeks ago, when it was so clear this is where we were headed, then it's like the Democrats would have been doing something at least. It's not just about the war powers. They would have facilitated a debate. We would have had an opportunity to talk about it where we would have seen the positions of elected officials. They didn't want to go on record. That's really the dark story here.
Yeah.
None of them actually wanted to have to go on record about this.
Yeah, no, absolutely. They didn't want it. They didn't want their ambitions to be known. And it's crazy because, once again, theoretical democracy is collapsing, especially in Western liberal democracies. And we see that, especially when you look at the polls and you look at the attitude that the American population broadly has, where only 27% of Americans actually want to strike Iran, and more than 70% of Americans don't. In the Democratic Party, the overwhelming majority, if not damn near the entirety of the party's base of support, actually, one, has dropped its support of Israel, has higher sympathies, much higher sympathies for the Palestinian population as opposed to the Israeli population and the Israeli government. And especially in the case of striking Iran, there is no real constituency. And yet, amongst our elected representatives, if you were to look at their makeup overall, if you look at their attitude overall, it's not a real democracy in any way, shape, or form. They are not abiding by the democratic wishes of their own base, of the majority of Americans, and certainly not even their own base of support within the party as well, where 80% of the Democrats say no war with Iran, and yet 98% or something as high as 98% of Democratic electeds are either quiet about it or very restrained in their approach. It's completely unacceptable.
Yeah. Well, Hasan, thank you very much, man, for having me on. And again, big thanks to your crew of people. Like from the first time I was on your feed, I've said this every time I've been on, but I really mean it. Like you've also got some wackadoodles with you, but like in general, your community is a great group of people, man.
Yeah.
And I always love the dialogue and the feedback that I get from your broader community.
Yes. Thank you so much for coming on. Everybody support Dropsite and Jeremy's reporting. It's an honor to have you on as always. Thank you. All right. Have a good one.
Take care, everybody.
Bye.